Valerie Kaur is an American activist, documentary filmmaker, lawyer, educator, and faith leader. She is the founder of the Revolutionary Love Project. Kaur's debut book, See No Stranger, a memoir and manifesto, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love. She is a civil rights attorney. In this video, she speaks of wonder as a way into relationships with people who may deem as the other.
Wonder is something that is not secondary, it is fundamental, it is foundational, it is necessary. Wonder is the building block for love. Here is how I am defining wonder. To wonder is to let in a sense of awe, openness, a sense of deep curiosity. It is to look upon the face of about another person gives us information for how to love them. Wonder is the wellspring of love. Now, when we wonder about people who we would otherwise see as strangers, especially people who are in harm's way, when we let even them inside of our circle of care, then wonder becomes an act of revolutionary love.
We struggle a bit with those videos, but I just wanted you to see Valerie. So I have this very curious memory. I'm on a long car trip with my parents and some of my siblings. As I said, my memory's a little foggy. The trip, like so many, was accompanied by a couple cassette tapes. I think one of them was the Beatles that provided a musical thread to the journey, and the other included a variety of songs that I believe were intended to be sing-alongs. One song was sung by the voices of Irish children, cute little voices, and there was this nursery rhyme quality to it, and here are the words. When Ireland was Ireland and England was a pup, when Ireland was Ireland and England was grown up, I am an Irish Catholic and I go to Sunday Mass, and any English son of a beep can kiss my Irish beep. Seriously, I have no idea where that tape came from or why we had it. I asked my mom during Thanksgiving, but she has no recollection of it, but my sister could sing along with it, so I know it happened. As I sang along, I delighted in the swearing and the irreverence of it. I was clueless about the 30-year violent conflict in Northern Ireland. I had no knowledge of the sectarian violence between Catholic nationalist and the mainly Protestant loyalist. It wasn't until I was listening to the podcast of On Being with Krista Tippett that my memory of that song even returned. Krista was interviewing Padraig Ó Tuama. He's an Irish poet, a theologian, and a conflict mediator. What caught my interest immediately in the interview was hearing about the depth and the length of the conflict in Northern Ireland. Imagine a conflict that permeates society so thoroughly that it results in children singing songs that degrade each other. The conflict known as the Trouble lasted from 1960s to 1998. After years of negotiation, there was what was called a Good Friday Agreement. The AP described the agreement as one which gave formal recognition to Northern Ireland's multiple identities, allowing residents to identify as British, as Irish, or as both. It ended direct UK rule, and it set up a Northern Ireland legislature and government with shared power between the Unionist and the Nationalist parties. From there, militant group disarmed, Prisoners were released and the British Army withdrew. People and goods could flow freely across the all but invisible border between the two. And the agreement was voted on and actually approved by both segments of Ireland, by the Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. The AP acknowledged that in 25 years after agreement, there have been and continue to be some real challenges in Ireland. The power-sharing government collapsed several times. Tension still exists between the nationalist and the unionist. But the political instability has not threatened the foundation of peace that was established in 1998 and remains today. At a time here when stories of division and rising violence are so prevalent in our country, I found it comforting and even hopeful to hear this history, even though I only have a rudimentary understanding of it, and to hear the voice and wisdom of Padraig Ó Tuama. Padraig was a leader of a community called Corrie Mila. I almost signed up to go volunteer for a year when I was reading about it. It's an intentional community in Northern Ireland that has emerged and strengthened during the Troubles in that region. Nowadays, it describes itself as a community of individuals inspired by their Christian faith, agreeing to be in respectful relationship with each other as an expression of how we can live together well. They model a way forward where peace requires continual practice and work. As they say on their website, peace requires us to commit to a new way of being, living not in rivalry with each other or with the threat of violence, but in respect for our differences, allowing conflicts to lead to greater understanding rather than to harm, and to new hope that we can create a future that works for all of us. What happened there? It wants to capture a quick note. I don't even know what to say about that. Let's see, done. There we go. That was very weird. My friend and colleague, Reverend Jen Crow, who serves over at First Universalist, wrote, "Despite our aspirations and our dreams, I don't believe there is a world where humans don't hurt each other. No set of conditions that keeps us from causing harm. No actualized permanent way of being from which we become perfect to one and all. As religious leaders," she says, "I believe that our job is to normalize this reality of imperfection, to help decrease the harm that we do to each other, to help ourselves and our congregations and communities to work with that harm that has already been done so that we can transform it. After all," she says, "what's the alternative? To keep adding more and more pain and harm to the world? To keep hurting each other out of the trauma of the present and the past? To miss out on the unfathomable transformations that are possible? The wonder of healing, of connection and care? This work of peacemaking, reducing harm, healing, and connection and care, it requires us to be countercultural at a time where messages in the media and our family and our communities loudly feed the opposite. Padraig and Valerie, who you heard in the video, use words like humility and curiosity and generosity when they speak of the way we need to move through the world. They call on us to honor how deeply we are interconnected versus feed division. They call on us to be our best selves, even in times of war and conflict and violence and fear and hatred. I'm in this social justice leadership class over at United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities, and recently we read a number of pieces by Valerie Kaur, and we spent time on that topic of wonder. It wasn't the type of wonder that's the synonym with awe, but it's the kind of wonder that starts with curiosity. So I wonder what's going on here. I wonder what they are all about. The faculty member who started the class, he started with this question of, what is the world you want to co-create? No small question. What is the world you want to co-create? I think as we all get more and more reactive, pushing up against what we don't want and what we fear the most in our world, we just dim the possibility of imagining what we want. When anger and fear and us versus them thinking drives our thinking, It feels as if literally doors close on our hearts and minds, and darkness and separation take up residence. We can no longer see the light. Some think the way to light is to return to the past. There are those with the odd remembrances of the past who want to make America great again, as we know. That certainly wasn't great for many. And then there's others who romanticize about a time when we were kinder to one another, when life was more predictable. But really, the world we want to co-create, it's not going to be made up of agains or used to be's, because there isn't any going back. Things will never be as they were. We have no choice but to go forward, shaping and influencing and adapting and finding meaning in what is happening now. So how do we move forward, remembering that we're not alone, that we are part of this one world? How do we move forward practicing humility, curiosity, wonder, as Valerie calls it, and generosity in our relations? I find for myself that I need to study and listen to and be filled with counter stories and narratives that give me courage, that give me strength, and that give me hope. Personally, I need to turn off the news when I feel like I can't breathe or my heart is pounding too quickly. Not so that I can forget what's happening, but to monitor my intake. And I need to slow down, make space, and seek out sources that remind me of my and our humanity and the rising and falling waves of history and conflict. Patrick says, we are standing in the middle of a bridge, and we need to decide how we're going to walk across it together and in what direction. He says, let's have the humility and generosity to step back and learn from places that have had the courage to look at themselves and look at where they've been, and try to forge a new path with something that resembles together. In order to right now, we should be taking these stories and these examples and these places and filling our pockets and our lungs and our hearts and our minds with them and learning deeply, he says. I guess those kind of sound like the words of a poet. We should be taking these stories and these examples and these places and filling our pockets and our lungs and our hearts and our minds with them, learning deeply. A central part of co-creating the world we want is paying attention to our own internal landscape. In order for us to be more open and loving people beyond our circle of comfort, we need to be grounded in our own bodies and hearts and minds. So many people I know who have overcome conflict in their lives and embarked on a path of healing have done so despite the other. As we all know, changing other people is a goal that is generally doomed to fail. That is, unless someone comes to you and has a desire to engage and learn and understand. Valerie Kerr speaks of what she calls a revolutionary love exercise that she practices. It's a practice that changes the other to kin. It's a practice that works to counter our immediate inclination. I know you guys do this, I do too, to decide who's in and who is out of our circle, who's one of us. She says, seeing no stranger begins with wonder. It is to look upon the face of anybody and choose to say, you are a part of me I do not yet know. She says can be hard to wonder about people we don't know because we are constantly predetermining what they are like. So she suggests a simple exercise with massive repetition in order to reorientate ourselves from being judgmental and closed off and instead being open and curious. She says, as you see people in your daily lives, Target, grocery store, whatever, the street, say sister, brother, sibling, aunt, uncle. Train your instincts to put people inside the circle of us and we. Even, actually, especially people you'd be inclined to write off, to veer away from, and to have prejudice about. I was doing this exercise in the airport as I was on the way to visit my dad and his wife. I was feeling really good about the exercise. Despite all the news you guys might hear about travel, Linda and I have had no problems whatsoever. We've encountered the opposite. So I was enjoying this exercise of revolutionary love. I'd say I kind of got a solid A in terms of a grade, in terms of my internal compass and this feeling of connection to my fellow travelers of all ages and races and sizes. Actually, I had just finished this book titled Testimony Inside the Evangelical Movement That Failed a Generation. It was written by John Ward, who was raised in the evangelical movement. By the end of the book, John was still a faithful Christian, but he redefined what it meant to him and his family in his adult life, and he went well beyond what he was taught in his upbringing. So not only was I able to see total strangers at the airport as brothers and sisters and siblings and aunts and uncles, but I even softened to people who were definitely outside of my circle and wonder about them as I passed them by. So I got into my window seat, with a woman next to me, and there was a man dressed in informal business wear on the aisle, doing good, feeling the interconnectedness, and then he turned on Fox News, and it kept running the entire trip. Immediately, that man turned into a stereotype. One of a person who wants to do harm to people I love, who wants to destroy our democracy and our environment, who drinks the Kool-Aid of conspiracy theories. My chest tightened, my stomach hurt a bit. This man became an automatic caricature of all that frightens me in today's society. So much for my practice. But Course says, there's this repetition. We have to just keep working on it. It's not perfection. This repetition can help retrain our brains to see no stranger. We can notice what biases arise in this practice. I got a good example of that on the airplane, and commit to the lifelong process of unlearning these biases. Course says, notice what biases arise in this practice and commit to unlearning them. She said, I know actually that I learned my biases just throughout my lifetime. As a woman, as a lesbian, as a liberal faith leader, I have developed biases as a form of protection at times. Finding people who wouldn't harm girls or women, who are allies to the queer community, who see faith in churches as places that are loving and inclusive and seek justice. But as much as some of these biases were a form of safety and protection, they also fossilized as biases that have reduced my curiosity of others and increased my fear of them. Otuma comes from a country which experienced terrorism and separation for decades, and yet after additional decades of self-examination and facilitating conversations across divides and studying social movements, he's reflective and wise. He's not just a Catholic. He's actually a gay Catholic who for over years he was closeted, and he heard plenty of people talk about him. He was subjected to exorcisms and reparative therapy by the community that said they loved him. And yet, and still, he lives now in a community which he describes as living well together. It doesn't mean we agree, he says. That doesn't mean that everything will be perfect. It means to say that in the context of imperfection and difficulty, we can find the capacity and the skill, as well as generosity and courtesy, to live well together. During our class on wonder and curiosity, we were asked what gets in the way of creating the community we dream of. And I wrote about when I'm tired or my spiritual life is running low and I feel less able to handle complexity, and I'm more inclined to use like blunt instruments of judgment versus curiosity. I wrote about how our greatest risks are retrenchment and despair, how COVID had moved many of us indoors, even more separated than before. How will the walls that separate us come down if we're not even in proximity of one another? A hardened heart has limited capacity for revolutionary or generous love. I did purchase a program by Valerie Kerr. I think it's like 8 sessions. So I'm going to review it and see whether this might be a good tool for us to work with together. We'll talk about that in the new year. Peace, love, community, understanding, it requires a level of curiosity and openness. It takes practice, real practice, getting an A, getting an F, being able to show up again and reflect, and be with courage and with a generous spirit. May we be a community that practices love and curiosity and wonder and care, not just here, but beyond our own community and beyond the walls of this here building. May it be so, and amen.